I don't remember exactly when this was. I'm pretty sure it was around March of 2018. I was 12 years old and in 7th grade. I often listened and read scary stories online about things like sleep paralysis, but I never thought it would happen to me. So, before I had woken up, I was having a strange dream. I was playing Counter-Strike, but it felt like I wasn't paying and it was real. I was shooting some targets and then I blacked out for a second. I woke up on the main road that goes into my neighborhood and saw that the road was gone. The houses on my street were very small, 2-story box houses. There were elderly people standing out front the houses all reading a newspaper, and the sign at the front of my neighborhood only read Brook, with the rest crumbling off. I then appeared at my morning bus stop for school, looking at my phone. Everything was normal until a bush, that normally isn't there, screamed at me. I remember clearly feeling as though this was normal, so I screamed back. We went back and forth until I woke up with the scream echoing in my ears. I was in my bed looking against the wall, unable to move. I hadn't realized that I was experiencing sleep paralysis, but was still freaked out by that screaming to fall back asleep. I lay there, not hearing anything for about 5 minutes. I then heard what sounded like heavy boots hitting the ground out in my living room, coming towards my bedroom area. Just so you know, outside my bedroom, there is a hallway. On the left, a bathroom, and at the end is my parents' room. And at the end of that, on the right, is a door that goes to my living room. The footsteps grew closer, coming to the hallway and then my parents' room. At that moment, I remembered my dad was out of town on a business trip, so my mom, who is a nice small lady, was defenseless. I heard the walking start up again and come towards my room. The door opened and whatever was out there came in, walked to the side of my bed and stared at me. I closed my eyes and began to pray, and I'm not really religious, but it's the only thing I can think to do. After what felt like hours, I tried to turn over to look and see if anyone is there. I opened my eyes and began to squint. The coast is clear. I crawl out of my bed slowly and look at the clock, and it's 4:14 in the morning. Dang, I got school tomorrow, I thought. I tiptoed over to my door and grabbed a decorative ore my mom put on the wall in my room and walked out to the hall. The light in our living room door was open with light on which was not normal, especially when my dad's out of town. I checked the bathroom and peeked around the corner of the door. Nobody. So I make a silent sprint into my mom's room, putting the ore down on the floor. I shake her awake, quietly whispering her name. "Mama, I think there's somebody in the house. I heard walking around outside my room. And... I began to tear up, realizing this all may have been in my head, and I woke up my mom for nothing. It's all right. We can go check the house real quick. Grab the ore and go check the house with my mother. There was nobody in our house. So I go back to bed relieved that we were safe and that none of that was real. I haven't had a sleep paralysis experience, and I'm glad it wasn't worse. This story seems like nothing compared to some of the other stories that I've read about. I was living in a smallish town last year with an interesting design. The front of the houses faced each other, but instead of streets, the front doors led to paths that formed something akin to a park walkway. Back of the houses opened on a horseshoe type of street. One area was in the middle of a couple apartment buildings, so it had a playground, a basketball court, and all of that jazz. I went for a walk around 1 in the morning to smoke a joint, so I go to the area with the court, sit on a bench, and light one up. After maybe 3 minutes of smoking, I look a bit to my left, and about 20 yards away, directly under a streetlight, are 2 very tall shapes. They're standing perfectly still, with no discernible features, and they were black. Not like a shadow person or a morph suit, but Vanta black. They're sucking the light and the warmth in. I know they're staring at me. I could feel it. I could feel the hate, the absolute certainty that if they were to come any closer, my life would more likely never be right again. Now, it takes quite a fair bit to make me afraid, but what went through me was pure, primal fear. I've seen ghosts by the dozen, and I've never been afraid. This was like staring the devil in the face and feeling the pure, unadulterated hatred radiating off of him. It took me 10 minutes of just being frozen in fear before I could stand up and book it out of there. And all in the time I had my eyes on them, there were no movement of any kind, no sound, no indication they were alive. I've not seen that since, but it got me looking up shadow people and the like. And I guess, according to the people with more experience and knowledge, there weren't shadow people. Apparently, due to their height, the darkness they were made of, and the feelings I got from them, they were demonic in origin. So that's my little story from hell. This happened when I was 7. I was sleeping in my parents' room because I didn't have my own room at the time. My dad was working at the casino down in Laughlin, which was about 30 minutes away from the house at the time, in a housing complex where every house looked exactly the same, except with different colored shackles on top of the houses. It was around 2:32 in the morning when I woke up to go to the bathroom and get a glass of water before going back to sleep. I spent a while in the bathroom, and since I didn't have a phone at the time, I was playing with my old SpongeBob Knows Your Name doll from around 2001. I was a complete SpongeBob fan, as I had Patrick and Squidward toys in my house's computer room, where all the toys of mine were kept in the closet. I finished going to the bathroom and proceeded to go out to the kitchen where my grandfather was asleep and left the TV on. I just left it on as he tends to keep it on 24/7. It seemed a bit tense in the kitchen, but I just ignored it. I poured myself a glass of water from our old water dispenser from where we lived in Tucson. I went back to my parents' room and I laid back down after drinking water. Around 10 minutes passed and I couldn't fall back to sleep. I looked for my mother's iPad, which I usually just watch YouTube videos until I fall asleep. I found the iPad case, opened it, but it was dead. I put it back where I found it and just laid there. 2 minutes passed and I suddenly had the urge to sit up. I followed the urge, sat up, stuck staring in the corner where my parents' lamp is. It turned off randomly, and I saw some black figure. It choked me until I could wake my mother, who was right next to me on the bed. She got up and I could barely speak. I was entirely out of breath. She grabbed me and ran into the living room where my grandfather was sleeping, and told me to sleep out there for the rest of the night. Exactly a day after that, I was sitting on the couch with my SpongeBob doll and my Woody doll. My Woody doll wouldn't stop going off, so we had to take out the batteries. A few hours after that, the doll went off again, but this time it was much louder, to where you could hear it from all the way in the back of the house. It just said, "Reach for the sky." I grabbed it and checked the batteries after it was done saying the phrase. The batteries weren't even in there, so it just makes it even more confusing. Not to mention that my SpongeBob doll said, "I'm going to kill you, James," which is my name, but was never programmed into the doll, nor was the phrase, so it just makes it creepier. I see shadow people in my peripheral vision all the time, and have done so for the majority of my life. It intensified when I started living with my boyfriend. I never mentioned anything about them, but my boyfriend randomly mentioned seeing weird things around the house. He would tell me he'd see someone standing there out of the corner of his eye, but when he looked, it was gone. One of the very consistent shadow people I see is one that glides past our window at nighttime. I saw it all the time and never mentioned it to my boyfriend. After I'd been living with him for a while, I'd noticed him quickly turning his head to look at the window at night while we were watching TV. Eventually, he told me he keeps on seeing something pass by the window, but it didn't make any noise, since our window was open at the time, and we had lots of dry leaves and twigs in that part of the yard. It's not headlights creating shadows. Outside of the window will be completely dark. Something even darker just passes through. I've only seen two, and neither was on a flat surface. While driving around, looking at abandoned houses, some friends and I drove past an occupied house from which both of them got a sinister vibe. I went back several times to show other friends, and the first two involved in these. The house is about 40 feet back from the street, and the yard has a lot of low, scrubby bushes. The first time, we pulled a T-turn in front, and a person-shaped shadow, flat back and unreflective, walked through our headlight beams about 10 feet in front of us, in front of some bushes and behind others. Our headlights reflecting off the house showed us the figure. We knew how far away it was by its size in relation to the house, and it being in the middle of the shrubs, which came up to just below its knees. Second time going by, there was a boat and a truck parked side by side next to the house, with the floodlight on the house shining right at them. This time, the figure walked in front of the truck and boat, towards the house, but upon reaching it, either disappeared or walked through the side of the house. On later visits there, I saw nothing out of the ordinary.
There's just something about those big, old Victorian-style houses. Not to mention the attic and the creepy basements. Anyways, I got some guests with me tonight, to which not all of them are quite human. My mother was a single parent of 6, 5 girls and 1 boy. I was the youngest. This took place in Hollywood, California in the late 1960s. She knew her kids were all different. She was very supportive and never wanted to suppress our separate abilities. She would just tell us not to go around telling people because they would think our family was crazy. Looking back at life with my mother, I tend to agree on so many levels. Something she always said stuck with me. People don't like what they can't understand. At the time, we were renting a house on Alexandria, but the owners wanted to move back in, so they wanted us to move. Mom worked day hours, so the only time she could go looking at rentals was at night. All 6 of us would pile into the big yellow wood panel station wagon with the suicide seat in the back, and off we would go. The adventure began in the night. Most of the time, a door was unlocked. This was the 60s. All of us armed with flashlights, but we had to be quiet. The scariest times for me was when the doors were open, so me being the smallest, my brother would help me into the window. Now that I'm saying this, I believe that was breaking and entering. If there was a house that made any one of us uncomfortable, she would scratch it off her list and move on. It was hard to find a house that fit all of us, especially anything my mother could afford. One day, I came home from school and was surprised to see all of our stuff being moved into the house directly across the street from an old evil lady with her windows blacked out lived in the back. I finally found my mother and asked her what was going on. She told me that she got a really good deal she couldn't pass up. Just stay away from that old lady, she would tell me. It was an old 2-story house with wooden floors, 1 bathroom, and 3 bedrooms. It used to be a 4-bedroom, but a small portion in the back of the house was divided to accommodate another renter that was the old lady. I must add that I was young and very small for my age. There was so much room and so much commotion downstairs. My mother was understandably distracted. I asked her why she didn't let me check the house for anything bad first, and she said, "Look, baby, there wasn't any time. It was a really good deal, and I had to take it. Why don't you check it out now?" Feeling very important, I went off to investigate. I went into the kitchen. Big. I went into the dining room. Fancy. And then I started up the stairs. Mom mentioned that there was a bedroom big enough for all my sisters, a place for all my toys in the hall, and a room for my brother, so I was excited to see this. The staircase was enclosed with a door at the bottom. You went up 4 steps to a landing where it turned and then proceeded up from there. I got up to the top step when it felt like 3 cold hands quickly, one after the other, grabbing around my throat with such force. I tried to scream, but the grip was getting tighter. I thought my vocal cords were being crushed. It started forcing me backwards, and I felt like I was going to fall, but it just held me there for what seemed like forever in my mind, my toes teetering on the edge of the top step. I couldn't move. It felt like surges of electricity throughout my body. Then it started guiding me backwards down the steps, fearing at any moment I was going to be thrown. I saw little spurts of my own breath coming from my nose. As it was guiding me down, I could feel only the edge of the steps grazing the tips of my toes while I was trying to kick my feet for any traction. It got me on the landing and up at the wall. It felt like 1,000 weights were pressing against my chest, still hardly touching the floor. I was starting to pass out when I heard a voice in my head say to me,
"You are strong. You have faith."
I saw a white glowing light all around me, and I said the only word that came to my mind. It then lessened its grip ever so slightly, but it was still enough for me to drop to the floor and run down to my mother. "Please, Mom, please, we can't live here, please." I told her what had happened, but she said it was too late. We had nowhere else to go. More stuff went on there, terrorizing my whole family, and we only lived there for about 6 more months. In the end, we all ended up sleeping together in the living room. Part 2. While I am waiting for validation from my siblings on experiences we shared together, I thought I would tell you another 1 or 2 experiences I had by myself as a child in the house on Alexandria. We all hated that house. My family and I only lasted 6 months there. My brother liked to tinker, take things apart and see how they worked, if you will. He took the time to sometimes share this part of his life with me. I'd like to think that's where I got my inventor's mind and my ability to fix almost anything. He set up a workshop under the stairs in the basement. I sometimes found some of my electric toys being dissected, then put back together on the workbench. One day I was looking for one of my toys and suspected I knew right where to look. But I was too scared to go down into the basement alone, so I took my trusty cat Friska. He will protect me, I thought. I started down the stairs with my cat in my arms. I got almost to the bottom when the lights went out and the door to the house slammed shut. Scared to death, I felt for the railing and started to run back up when I saw something. Normally, you could see the moonlight from under the house through the vents to outside. Something moving was blocking the light out and quickly coming towards me. It almost looked like billowing black smoke from the back of the house. Just then, my loving cat Friska hissed and clawed me to get away. He jumped from my arms and escaped through one of the grates on the other side. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could with my heart pounding out of my chest. I grabbed the door handle and jiggling it back and forth thinking it was stuck. I heard a loud, long exhale behind me followed by the smell of rotten eggs. The door finally opened and I slammed and locked it behind me. When I told my brother, he said that he never felt good down there and he kept the door always locked after that. My family was very involved with the church. We cleaned it every Saturday and helped with all the events and the variety of shows. Funny thing was that our family was so big it felt like we were the variety show. One such day, they were all at church doing something. I don't remember what. I had just arrived home from school and someone, I think it was one of my sisters, was supposed to be there to greet me. Now this event happened in the hall. As you walked through the dining room to the left, you walked into the hall. You turned right, and on the left is the boarded up wall to the tenant's dwelling behind us. That evil old lady. Just thinking about her now gives me the chills. And straight ahead was the bathroom. If you turn left in the hall, you'll see my mom's room that she and I shared together. Next to that, the door to the upstairs, and in the middle, the door to under the house. Well, nobody was there, and I wasn't going to stay in that house alone, so I walked into the hall and sat on the phone bench. For those of you who don't know what that is, it kind of looks like a wooden end table with a padded seat on it so you could talk on the Accord phone. Anyways, earlier, I saw my friend's dad's car parked across the street, so I knew he was home. I figured I could just call and just hang out there and just wait for someone to come home. As I am sitting there, I hear crackling coming from upstairs. It must have been one of my siblings, I thought, so I went to the bottom of the stairs and leaned in on one foot. "Who's up there?" The crackling stopped. Thinking they didn't hear me, I yelled again, and this time calling out one of my sister's names. Still nothing. So I sat back on the bench and waited for them to come down. It was quiet. Not a sound. Just then, to the right of me, it sounded like someone was pressing their body against the other side of the boarded up wall listening. Then a muffled, quiet, evil giggle. It felt off. Really off. The crackling noise started back up again, now coming from the top of the stairs, followed by an ear-piercing ringing inside my head. Feeling uncomfortable, I picked up the phone not to take my eyes off that staircase. I dialed my friend's number, and before I could even say hello, I could see it as it turned the corner of the staircase. It was huge. It didn't have a human form. There were what looked like hundreds of eyes all over, and it was pulsating red to amber. The deafening sound crackling was coming from it, with sparks flashing all over its form. It was slowly gliding down the stairs, coming towards me. I then heard more prominent laughter, almost like a crackle coming from behind the wall, and I ran. I dropped the phone and I ran straight over to my friend's house until someone came home. Needless to say, I wasn't the only one that was experiencing these things in this home. Shortly after my mom came home, she said, "That's it. We packed our stuff and we got the hell out of Dodge." We ended up staying at a hotel for a couple weeks before we found somewhere else to stay. And ever since then, I've never experienced anything else paranormal. And I hope I never do. The man drove to the house on Lily Street and stepped onto the raggedy porch. He cringed as the boards creaked loudly beneath his feet. He felt like he was beyond the point of returning to his house without at least looking inside. He wanted to investigate and understand people's desires to have been scared by potentially haunted houses, harboring evil spirits. Although, he didn't believe the stories. The door was unlocked. He sauntered in, now standing next to the old staircase. He heard a distant cry from a crow as it soared past the house just before he closed the front door behind him. Or had it closed on its own? He couldn't remember. Slowly, meticulously, the house began reeling him in like a helpless fish until he found himself in a small bedroom. He liked to believe that he walked up the old stairs to the room under his own free will. But that wasn't how he truly felt. It was as though a hand pressed up against his back and pushed him, guiding him up the stairs and down the dark hallway to the room. In the old days, this may have been a delightful guest room for a friend or relative of the house's owner to take up in, stretched out and enjoy the morning view from the window. Now, it was practically a prison cell. The room was cold, which was what made the man gradually tired. He hesitated, sat down on the bed. His eyes became droopy as he wrinkled the plain white sheets that hadn't been touched in so many years. I should head home, he said aloud to nobody. Don't want to spend the night in this dump. He stood up and staggered out of the house. The coldness left his body. There was still some daylight left when he got home. He figured it'd be dark if he went to take a nap now. He considered himself a night person anyways. Also, he felt the need to sleep off the old wretchlessness of the house. He laid down on his bed, wrapped himself in his blue blanket, and dozed off. He woke up and it was indeed nighttime. That was the first thing he noticed before he realized something was wrong. He was cold again. He was not wrapped in his blue blanket. The air felt murky and dusty. The man slowly sat up, rubbed his eyes, and looked down to see that the moon was casting a light over the plain white sheets he was sitting atop. He couldn't muster up a scream. The thousands of thoughts running through his head were too distracting. The loudest, most prominent one was, I never left the house. The door to the old guest room slammed shut. The window shade dropped down. Pitch black. Complete silence. The man's bulging eyes frantically scanned the room. They stopped as soon as he heard a faint creak of a footstep making contact with the floorboards. I used to live in the Philippines, and the house I lived in was built when the Philippines was being occupied by Japan during World War II. It had two small walkways, one at the side of the house and one at the back of the house. At the corner where the two walkways meet is where my dog's huge wooden doghouse was. I say huge because I could literally go in and sleep in it comfortably, and I was a huge kid at 12 years old. One night, I was told by my uncle to go and feed Casper. I know, right? I'm writing my ghost experience for my dog's name as a popular ghost name, and no, I'm not lying. My dog's name is really Casper. Of course I said yes right away, because I wanted to play with my dog, and so I went. Now Casper is a happy dog, always running around and always happy to see any of my family, but that night was different. While I was walking towards his doghouse, I realized that I didn't hear him barking or running around, so I thought he was at the back walkway, so I just continued towards the doghouse. It was nighttime, around 8 p.m. I stopped halfway through when I noticed that Casper was inside the doghouse. Now this was worrisome, for he always runs out to greet me if he sees me, so I thought maybe something was wrong, like he was sick or whatever, so I quickened my pace to get closer to him. Once I got there, though, he seemed fine. I put down the food next to him and filled up his water bowl, and no reaction whatsoever. Casper just stared towards the back walkway. I got curious, so I looked towards where he was looking at, and what I saw gives me chills when I remember that day. I saw a man just standing there staring at me with a blank expression. He was wearing some type of military uniform and was holding a rifle. I am not a gun expert, so I can't tell you what kind it was. At the tip of the gun, though, it rested a bayonet. What got me focused on it was that it was a bloody bayonet. At that point, I was just frozen. I remember the fear and thinking, this is it. Someone is here and he's gonna kill me. I don't quite remember what made me look away from that bayonet, but when I did, the first thing I noticed was how the man was now missing half of his face. Seeing him only with a half face jolted me out of my frozen state, and I ran for it. I did not care to look back to see if it was following me or not. I even tackled my uncle who was coming to check on me. I cried so hard when I realized that I was on top of my uncle. He took me inside and waited for me to stop crying. I fell asleep then from crying. The next morning, my uncle talked to me about what had happened, and I told him everything. He was genuinely worried when I finished, because he told me that I was out there in the walkway for an hour, and that was the reason why he was coming to check on me. He also told me that I wasn't the only one to experience such things in this house. I later found out that the uniform the man was wearing was the standard Japanese military uniform at the time of World War II. I appreciate you guys listening to my story. I have other experiences in that house, but this one was by far the craziest.
Basically, for years, one shadow person, which seemed male in retrospect, used to stand by my mom's bed and essentially would force me to go sleep. He would interrupt me reading books by basically being so distracting and then eventually intimidating. I had to leave the light on or even pull the covers over my head just to fall asleep. His shape was kind of an adult-sized oval with diffused edges, and he wouldn't really move. He only really ever occupied 2 spots next to the bed. Once, when I was maybe 4, I saw several very clear human shadows on the wall. They looked like people waiting for a subway train or maybe guests at a museum milling about in front of a painting. I think this is not a unique phenomenon. I feel like I've read similar experiences, if anybody knows. They seemed to be watching my family and I. We were all sleeping at my grandparents', and they had a small house, so we had set up a bed of blankets and pillows on the living room floor. My dad and brother were already asleep. I sat upright, just staring at them, watching us. They seemed very casual and relaxed, walked around and talked to each other. They seemed very much like silhouettes of living humans. I also got the sense that they didn't know I could see them. Anyway, I eventually got up and found my mom in the kitchen. She asked why I was still awake, and I told her I was watching the people. What people? The people on the wall? What? There's people on the wall watching us. What? No, you didn't see that. Go lie down. My mom had gotten freaked out. Not a person, but most recently, I got to see a ghost cat. I was walking toward my bedroom in the dimly lit darkness, and I see this small, football-like shadow near the ground kind of bounce past my feet and ahead of me, kind of like a playful cat. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Left, right, and left. After the initial surprise and confusion, it left me absolutely delighted. Cutest ghost ever. This happened in 2011, when I was 7. I'm a girl, now 14, and I just talked to my mother about this incident and decided I would share it. So, I lived with my grandmother, father, mother, and 2 dogs quite far from any town. The house was big, so I usually play hide and seek with my mother a lot. I don't remember which month it was, so my mom filled me in on this. She said it was October, during the holidays. This one particular day, my dad was out driving my grandmother to the hospital, as she had an appointment with the doctor, so I was left alone with my mom. After several rounds of hide and seek and watching a movie with my mom, it began to get dark outside, and my dad still wasn't home. I've always been scared of potential home invasions, so I was paranoid all day because my dad wasn't with us. He made me feel very safe. Me and my mom decided to play Monopoly. Fast forward an hour. When I was 7, I thought I was very sly, so I kept stealing money from my mom's stash. Now that I look back, she was probably pretending not to see, as I was taking a $50 bill from her Monopoly cash. She said, "The power will go out soon." This left me completely puzzled, as I had no idea how she'd know this. But sure enough, it went out about 15 minutes later, and I started to panic because, as most little kids, I'm scared of the dark. She handed me this Nokia phone and let me play my favorite game on it, which at the time was Doom. She told me to go hide under the bedsheets if I'm scared, and that she'll be back soon. I asked where she's going to be, but she doesn't answer. As she heads out from the room, she locks the door. I laid under the sheets, killing some monsters in the game for what felt like hours, but was probably only really 5 minutes. Footsteps were heard in the kitchen, which was next to the room I was in, so I took the sheets off my head and yelled out, "Mom?" Glad that she's back because I was really scared, but no answer was heard. The footsteps didn't stop, so I yelled again, "Mom, can you please come?" After I had said that, the footsteps had stopped completely. I got a sudden rush of adrenaline, so I held tight onto the phone and dashed out of the room to the kitchen, which was empty. I was left puzzled, but didn't wait for long as I ran to the door, unlocked it as there's keys on the inside too, and ran to the corridor. Alright, so the corridor has 4 doors. On the right side, one at the very back, which I was never allowed to go in. I later learned that that room was where my great-grandma died, and no one touched it ever since. It also had stairs next to it, leading to the 2nd floor, and one at the front which led to the outside. The 4th door I came through was the closest to the outside door, so I quickly opened the outside door, ready to run out, but the rush of adrenaline was gone, and I got scared on the outside too. It was very dark and I was barely able to see. My only choices were go back to the room I came from or scream for my mother. I chose to scream for my mother and started screaming over and over again. I guess I wasn't loud enough because there were no replies. I remember starting to sweat in panic, Different scenarios playing through my little head. Scenarios like a murderer killing my mom and coming for me next, or my mom leaving me forever. I know, stupid, but I was only 7 after all. I remember looking down at my feet and beginning to cry. More footsteps were heard, but this time, behind me. I looked behind me and saw a silhouette of a tall person. I'm assuming it's a male due to the body build, at the end of the hallway, standing in front of the door. I can't recall what he looked like because it was all black. I stared at him for about 15 seconds in pure horror. This got my adrenaline pumping again, and I ran out the door, towards the outside toilet, only to be greeted by my mom, who looked worried. After I told her what had happened, through uncomfortable sobs, my dad was in the driveway already parking his car. My granny was left at the hospital for some treatment. He searched the house, but no one was found, so my mom told me it was just my imagination, but I know what I saw and heard. Fast forward 7 more years. I live in another house, and I randomly remembered about this incident and talked to my mother about it. She seemed quite hesitant about telling me this, but at the end I convinced her. What she said gave me chills. Apparently, when I was 4, I started to stare at one particular corner in the kitchen and laugh like crazy. My mom asked me what's so funny, and every time I pointed to the same corner, but never told her why it was funny. After a few months, the random giggles I let out when staring at the corner didn't stop. What made my mom lose it was the fact that I started speaking random German words that I've never even heard before. We have no relatives that are German or can even speak fluent German, and I wasn't introduced to technology at that age either. My mother knew it's German because she can actually speak a little bit, but never really spoke it. She bribed me with candy to tell her how I learned to say the following words in German: it, help, chocolate, shower, and war. My response completely shocked her. I pointed to the same corner again and said, "He taught me how." My mom kept her cool though. She asked me who I was talking to, and I said, "The man who makes me laugh." My mom asked me what he looked like, but I only said he looks like a shadow, and that he's from Germany. When she asked where the man lived, I pointed to the 2nd floor. This all made sense because I always hated the 2nd floor and never went up there because I felt like I was being watched. My parents took it upon themselves to Google the history of the house, and sure enough, it was built by Germans. I don't remember any of this, but my mom kept reassuring me it happened. My father said he remembers it too, but decided to not tell me until now. I talked to the German man in the corner up until 5 years of age. I'm pretty sure you can put 2 and 2 together. But if not, the man I saw when I was 7 was the same man I talked to when I was 4. Every time I go back to visit my grandma, I always feel uneasy. I recall a dream I had where I was outside during the night on my old childhood street. The road was lit up from the streetlights in the usual orange color, and in my dream, I saw tons of shadow people walking on the other side of the street from where I was on the sidewalk, and all I could do to tell myself was to act normal, as if there was nothing out of the ordinary. I remember seeing them literally everywhere, but they didn't notice me or do anything, and all I could see was shadows that resembled human figures. I saw a shadow person in my great-aunt's house when I was about 8 years old. All of us were outside saying goodbye to each other when I looked up into a 2nd-story window, which was a bedroom, and saw a shadow figure that was turned to the side. The shadow quickly moved to the left as if it was sucked in that direction. It was like the movement was being led by the shadow's chest, if that makes any sense. It was really freaky, and when I thought of the layout of the house, the shadow would have been moving into a closet. I've seen them for as long as I could remember. I had one that was constant when I was a kid, to the point I would try to feed them. My mom has stories of watching me drop raisins in midair trying to feed someone, and getting really frustrated and yelling that if they weren't going to even try, I wasn't going to waste my raisins. In high school, we moved and the house there seemed to be riddled with them. My friends saw one in the middle of the night, sitting on the foot of my bed, just staring at her. Someone else saw one go down our hallway towards my room. My sister and I called him Sergeant Pepper because it looked like he had a wide-brimmed hat, and there was always the smell of fresh ground black pepper when we would see him. I have a photo somewhere of my dog staring at a bright orange orb. My dad saw a woman in white on Christmas in that house. Another friend saw a little boy in our living room playing with blocks, who of course was gone when she came to get me. There was a peeping ghost at that house. Always was seen looking in my sister's window. She would stand there and watch it while I ran outside, and she just said it would turn its head when it heard me coming, then just vanish. We had a fenced-in yard and dog. It wasn't human. There was a lot of other things that happened with no evidence of shadow people involved in that house. Now that I've moved, I see them mostly at a distance, most often in our parking lot, and half the time I just assume it's a trick of the light, until my boyfriend says he just saw someone duck down behind a car. I was walking out my parents' back door, and I turned my head slightly and saw the door open with a shadow move through and run down the stairs to my right. I 100% thought my brother ran down for a beer in the basement. I had to go down and check after he didn't answer, and no one was there. I know it sounds lame, but I saw it in the right 50% of my vision, not my peripheral. It was around 4 feet tall, amorphous, but in a spiky way. Best description is the ICP logo with no axe, or like a person drawn like a Jolteon, with long slender endings for legs and arms. For those that aren't familiar with what a Jolteon is a Pokemon, which you can Google, Jolteon, Jolteon. Later that night, the soap and lotion containers next to the sink swept themselves off the counter on their own. I recreated the move I made a dozen times to confirm I didn't push them. Nothing before or after this night. I don't know what to think of it other than I saw it and I don't know what to do with the information now. I was about 8 years old at the time, sleeping in bunk beds. I'm on top, my sister below. I woke up and looked toward my door and saw what looked like a witch shape, pointy hat, pointy nose, clawed fingers. Almost exactly like the Wicked Witch from The Wizard of Oz, Shirley Temple Black version. It creeped toward my bed in a smooth, sliding fashion, until it got to the little ladder. I was a bit scared and unsure what to do. I had been clenching my Wicked E. Warwick stuffed bear, and felt bolstered to act. I held Wicket by his legs and swung at the shadow's head, forcefully saying, "Go away." And it did. Just sort of, puff, gone. No swirling mist or anything. It just stopped being there. Never saw it again. I attribute seeing this shadow to the mental and violent physical abuse my mother had started inflicting on me and my sister at the time. I also think I developed a fear of absolute darkness at this age. I always feel like I'm being watched if I know I'm alone and can't see anything due to no light. 4 years ago, I was experimenting with astral projection, and I almost succeeded from the first try, and other paranormal stuff like contacting spirits, Ouija boards, etc. Until one night, I woke up. I would presume it was around 2 to 4 a.m. to see what I can barely describe as a burning shadow, like a black fire. A while ago, I was rewatching the 2013 remake of The Evil Dead, and this drawing from the movie reminded me of it. But anyway, the second I saw it, I lost the ability to breathe. I remember that I started kicking while gasping heavily for air as it was choking me. Then, I passed out. But weirdly enough, when I woke up the next day, I was confused. I was thinking, what the hell happened last night? I couldn't remember it at first, but then I remembered it immediately. It was weird. Maybe something more happened that night, but needless to say, I never experimented with that again since. First time I was 10 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at my door, and there was a shadow person standing there in the hallway. I used to sleep with the door open, and I could clearly see the outline of it. It was static though. The outline was clear but shifted, like there was an interference in what I was seeing. I could tell I was being watched and looked at, but there was no facial features, just a black mass in the shape of a person. The figure darted to the left of the doorframe and entered the living room. I could hear its footsteps, oddly enough. It came back, then stopped in my doorway again before going down the hall towards my parents' room. I got up to look, and of course nothing. I sleep with my door closed now. I never saw it again in that house. I heard it though, walking through the house many times. It wasn't until I moved into my current place that I saw them again. This time, much more frequently. I see them every few weeks or so now. They don't bother me. I don't bother them. We simply coexist. Once on vacation with my family, I woke up in the middle of the night for some reason, and I hear someone at the door. The resort rooms were in a motel style where you were outside before you went in. The bed I was in was closest to the door, and I was on the edge of the bed near it. I watched as the door handle started to jiggle a little, and I didn't know what to think. I looked behind me and saw each one of my family members in bed asleep. I knew I was awake, and I knew it was not one of them. The door started to open, and I just stared. A black figure started gliding toward me slowly. It became right to the edge of the bed in front of me and reached its arms out to me. I just stared up at it terrified and told me, "Come with me." I didn't move or say anything. I just kept staring. It then started to move backwards, and then I started shaking my sister next to me aggressively, saying, "Do you see it? Do you see that?" And I kept looking back at it while trying to wake her up. Right as she woke up, it disappeared into a dark corner. It still scares me to think about it. I was on a hometown vacation with my mom and granny. What the hell on earth was woken me up in the middle of the night? The light was killed, and then I sensed something weird. I checked that my mom and granny were still sleeping in nets, while someone or something stood in front of the edge of my bed. It was a pitch black entity. It put me on a negative state of frightening. I couldn't do a single movement until it came towards me, and then I screamed out, waking everybody up. They put on the light and see nothing. Now my mom was pissed off and blamed that one of my imaginary friends, since I used to be an imaginative kid. But I swear it's real, not a nightmare. I don't know if it matters, but I live in the corner of all my neighboring townhouses. It's a 2-story house, and I have a yard and a parking parallel to my yard. One half of the house is not attached to anything. The other side is a neighboring 1-story house. I can clearly see the parking lot 15 yards away from my bedroom window, so I'm super close to my vehicle. July 2017, on a Monday, I was taking a shower in Miami, Florida, in my townhouse. I could hear a TV novella, kind of like the Spanish programming, or Family Feud with lots of cheering and talking. I don't ever watch novellas, so I look over my balcony after I dry myself off, and all the lights are off. At first, I thought it was my dad or my brother, because we are roommates in a 3-bedroom, but I was alone. I just went back in my room and played piano. Tuesday, I heard the TV show Cheerings again, but now followed by footsteps going up or down the stairs. I couldn't tell. I get out wet and pray somebody is home. No one is home, though all the lights are off and my TV's off downstairs. So I go in my room and seclude myself and play video games again. Wednesday, I hear the same as yesterday. I run all the way downstairs and grab my sharp $100 kitchen knife, run through each room looking for some intruder. I check everything except the attic in my dad's bedroom because it's tiny and frankly, there's no ladder. I go in my room, set my alarm for work, and my blinds are wide open so I could see my black Cadillac Escalade. I swear on my sister's life, I see a trench-coated fedora-wearing man near my car, but not touching it. And at first, I don't think anything paranormal. I thought it was a neighbor walking by because of how close the houses are, and the street lamp is pretty bright. But then I noticed them not moving. So I began to think they are looking inside of my car, trying to case it and steal something. But I get closer to the window and notice its shoulders aren't facing towards my car. It's facing towards me and standing unnaturally still. I dial my girl with the phone still in hand and keep staring at it to make sure I'm not hallucinating. I look away and look back, but it's still there. I explain to her, "Babe, I think someone is trying to steal from my car, but they're not moving. It feels very eerie." She says to make sure all my doors are locked in case they are trying to break into my place. But why are they wearing a trench coat? It's humid as hell in Florida. You can literally sweat outside at nighttime just being naked. I look at the clock and realize I have been staring at someone standing still for 2 entire minutes. 120 seconds. I go downstairs, check every door again. I have an even bigger window downstairs, facing my parking lot, but I don't see anybody standing by my car. I look at my oven and notice it's around 10, and either my brother or dad will get home soon. So I tell that to my girlfriend, run upstairs and lock my door with my knife in my room. I leave every light in my house on at this point. I don't see the fedora user by my caddy anymore, and I do feel relief, but stress. So I sit down, blast my speakers, and start playing games. I pause my music and continue speaking to my girl, and tell her that, "Babe, people say that you can't be a pussy in front of ghosts. Supposedly, they feed off fear, and if I continue to be scared of them, they will." In the middle of me saying, "They will feed off my fear," I could feel a cold finger or object run up my spine from the crack of my behind up to my neck, very slowly. If I could guesstimate, it would be 15 seconds to travel, and it was as if something super cold like a finger sitting in ice was touching me from the inside of my body. As the 15 seconds pass while it's running up my spine, I start hearing a loud pitch, getting louder and louder. My speakers are muted, by the way, so it wasn't coming from them. As it finally reaches my neck, I feel a chill come down on my body like I have never before. I'm from Florida, but I've been in the snow before, and that was colder and stiffer than freezing temperatures. Then my book bag on my bed goes flying at the window that looks out towards my Cadillac. I turn my head with both hands on my piano, and my head hugging my shoulder because I'm on the phone with my girl, and see most of the shutter closed by something hitting it. I peek on the side of the bed and see my book bag upside down, and fear comes over my body like a warm blanket. I run out of the room in boxers and a tank top, struggling to grab pants. So I frustratingly just grab the blanket and run outside barefooted on the phone, still sitting in the table between my house and my car, and waited for an hour for my family to get home. The aftermath was my family laughing at me, followed by jokes from them being in my underwear. Aside from the jokes, My dad's side is involved in Santeria, so my dad immediately took my aunt's house to grab sage, espanta muerto from the plant they have in their backyard, and Santeria chalk. We saged down the house. Our family psychic told us to draw crosses on the inside and outside of every type of doorway, no matter if it's a closet leading nowhere, or even my attic. The type of chalk they use in Santeria is made out of chicken eggs. I don't know if that information matters, but I'll just leave it in here. We got 10 vases or so, filled them up with a cup and a half of water each, separated an even amount of false daisy, evenly in all the vases, and added in a vase in each room, including the bathrooms. Espanta muerto means scare the dead, and people use it to basically detect if spirits are in the house without EMF meters. We left them in each room, went to bed that Wednesday, and on Thursday, all the plants were alive, except my brother's room. It was completely wilted. To me and my dad, it makes sense because a week prior, he fought with my dad and he had been looking for a job for 4 months, and my dad wanted him to help with rent, so he would always put off interviews, and my dad eventually got fed up that week prior and told him he needs to leave or get a job. They both screamed at each other, and he ended up talking about how he's 23 and doesn't know what he wants to do in life, and he's been looking up different graphic designing or logo creation jobs for people so he wouldn't have to work at McDonald's. And his girlfriend, he broke up with him in early 2017, still had him depressed, and he was telling my dad he felt like killing himself, and then fell into my dad's arms, so my dad started crying as well. They both sat down and made a plan on finding a job, which he eventually did. But I say this because there was a lot of negative energy every time he would come home. He was secluded in that room, and it turned out that that room failed the false daisy test. We kept all the flowers, only replacing my brother's room, and it stayed alive normally. From then on, I've never felt a presence near me when I was home and alone. All game show sounds and footsteps has ceased, for now. I want to astral project eventually, but at least now I'm wary and will try to control the fear they give me for the faithful weak.